Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is the 7th day of the feast. So we're here today celebrating Feast of Tabernacles, and that's a rehearsal for the 1,000-year rule of Yahweh and Yahshua over the earth. The millennium will be a 1,000-year rule with them ruling the whole earth with Torah. You see, what we're in right now, and hopefully we're about to finish the 6,000-year-long experiment of man's self-rule without Torah. It's almost finished. A few more years. So today and all this week we're rehearsing Yahshua's 1,000-year rule over the earth with Torah. He'll rule from Jerusalem, and the scripture says the law will go forth from Jerusalem. And that will be for 1,000 years. All right, near the beginning of the 1,000-year millennium, we studied last week about the regathering of the Israelite people back to the land of promise. They're going to be coming back. And they're coming back to a land of milk and honey. And we'll see from some events today, the regathering might be delayed a little bit. There's going to be some horrible events right before the beginning of the millennium. And then some more horrible events at the end of the millennium. So there may be a few years of cleanup in there, but as soon as we get the war mess cleaned up, then Yahweh, Yahshua will begin to clean up the earth and begin to call everybody back to Jerusalem. So this prophecy we're going to read today, it's not an analogy. It's not a parable. There's not a trick Hebrew word in it anywhere. These events will happen. These will happen. They're prophesied. It's kind of straightforward. So prophecy tells us what we'll look about today in this study. Prophecy tells us of two huge, gigantic wars. Two huge, gigantic wars. They're around Israel and around Jerusalem. And there's one huge war just before the beginning of the millennium. One big war just before the beginning of the millennium. And there's a second huge war at the end of the millennium. A second huge war at the end of the millennium. So today, in this teaching lesson, let's look at some of the prophetic events at the beginning of the millennium. And then after we study that for a while, let's say in the second half, let's look at some more prophetic events at the end of the millennium. See, we're last day of Feast of Tabernacles, so it would be appropriate to study something kind of in the last years, the last 50 years or so of the millennium and just after. So we'll do that. So first we'll study at the beginning of the millennium. Now we had an interesting Bible study by Mr. Apadaska a few nights ago on the book of Revelation. And he talked about maybe the last 7 years. There'd be the man of sin, kind of comes in there in the middle of the last 7 years and starts to cause a lot of trouble. And that, I think, all builds up to a great war. And it's going to be a war that involves a 200 million man army. Did all the armies in World War II have that many men? All the armies in World War II didn't have that many men. But this is going to be a 200 million man army. How could that be? I don't know, but it's what it says. And then it's going to be around Jerusalem, and it's going to be in and around Israel. So let's look at that one first. That's at the beginning of the millennium. Let's turn to Revelation 9. Revelation 9 and verse 13. Revelation 9 and verse 13. And we know this is right before the millennium starts. It's right before the millennium of Yahshua's rule starts, because in Revelation 9 and verse 13, and it says, it's about one of the trumpet messengers. The sixth messenger sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, golden slaughter place, which is before Elohim. This is the sixth trumpet. So you know it's right before the millennium begins. This is right at the end of man's rule. It's about to happen. And then verse 14, and saying to the sixth messenger who had the trumpet, release the four messengers, the four angels, release the four messengers, those having been bound at the great river Euphrates. So we can't see them, we don't know what they are, but in the end time there's four super beings bound in the great river Euphrates. In verse 15, and the four angels, those having been prepared for the hour and the day and the month and the year, they were released they were released to kill 1/3 of mankind. So it looks like if we knew where they were in the river Euphrates, we'd try to stop them, but we don't know where they are. So it's at a specific time. This is a very specific time. Sometimes in prophecy, it's a little more general than the time flow. But if we read that backwards a little bit, it says this is going to happen in a year and a month and a day and an hour. They're going to be released. So he don't tell us what day and hour that is, but it's a specific time in the plan of Yahweh and Joshua where they're going to release these guys, and then they start to work. And they're going to bring about an army. They're going to bring a 200 million man army into Israel and Jerusalem. And on the way to Jerusalem and then around Jerusalem, they're going to kill 1/3 of mankind. Now, if that happened today, it'll be about 2.5 billion people. 2.5 billion people, a huge pile of bones and corpses. Now, this is a real event. It's going to happen. And verse 16 says, and the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. And I heard the number of them. John says he's in a vision. This is a vision, but he says, I heard the number of them. So one of the beings in the vision John had, it's a vision of the Father's throne in heaven, says, John, it's 200 million men. So that's a mighty big army, and it's around Jerusalem. It's in Israel. And from what I know, what little I know about the army and about the military, that big an army, it might be, if you draw a circle 50 miles from Jerusalem in all directions, and that might be too small, it would be full of tents and mess tents and latrines and trucks and supply stores. It'd just be for 50 miles solid around Jerusalem. But it says it's going to draw these 200 million man army is going to be drawn to be there. Now let's look in. Let's see. We've read 16. Let's go to Revelation 16. Revelation 16. And we'll read a little more about them. Revelation 16 and verse 12. Revelation 16 and verse 12. And this is a little later in the end time. This is when we've got past the trumpets and we're into the 7 vials or the 7 bowls of plagues that they pour out on the earth. And the 6th messenger poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. See, it's hinging around Euphrates again. And its water was dried up in order to prepare the way of the kings from the east. So somehow there's a huge army east of the river Euphrates. That would be in Persia, in Iran, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, that way. So they're going to dry up the river so they can cross with their big armies. It's in order to prepare the way of the kings of the east. So that's part of the 200 million man army. It doesn't say that directly. I think you'll see that it's all associated. It will be the same group. So let's read on in verse 13. And demons are in there. In verse 13 it says, I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. It's demons, but in his vision he says they look like frogs. For they are spirits of demons. Yeah, there it is. These 3 frogs are spirits of demons, and they're doing signs which go out to the kings of the earth, to the kings of the entire world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of Joshua the Almighty. Joshua is going to be fighting their army around Jerusalem. So here we see they're getting their army ready. It's from all the kings of the entire world. They're going to send troops to this army. Let's look on and let's look at verse 16. Verse 16, and it says, this big army, all the kings of the earth, they gathered them together to the place called in the Hebrew Har Megiddo. It's the plain of Megiddo. And that in another place might be called Armageddon. It's a flat plain. It's pretty big. It's north and west of Jerusalem a ways. So the big army is gathering around Jerusalem. They know something's coming. Something's up. So now let's turn to Revelation 19. Revelation 19. And in the time flow of Revelation 19, in Matthew 24, Messiah has already come in the clouds to gather his elect, and they go with him. I'll say back to the marriage supper of the Lamb in heaven at the Father's throne. And now we'll read verse 7, Revelation 19 and verse 7. We'll see some more about the great war. This is right at the beginning, right near the beginning of the millennium. We'll read verse 7. And it says, let us be glad and rejoice and give him praise, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his wife has prepared herself. The 144,000, the assembly, they've prepared themselves. Now this is a pivotal verse. Previous to this, it talks about the bride of Messiah, the bride of Messiah, the bride of Messiah. Now it says the wife of Messiah has prepared herself. So the wedding has taken place, and Messiah has a wife. And we'll look in verse 9, and one of the angels in heaven says to John, says, "Write, blessed are those who have been called to the marriage supper of the Lamb." And he said to me, "These are the true words of Elohim." It means it's going to happen. It's guaranteed. There will be a wedding in there, and there'll be a bride. 144,000, it looks like, will be the bride. There may be guests at the wedding. We don't know for sure, but in all the marriage parables in the New Testament, there are guests at the wedding. The Father and Yeshua will arrange that as they will. They'll arrange that as they will. Let's look in Revelation 19 and verse 11. Revelation 19 and verse 11. And there we read, "And I saw the heavens opened." This is in John's vision. "And there was a white horse. And he who sat on him was called Trustworthy and True. And in righteousness he judges and fights." Who is that? That's Joshua. That's the groom. And it says, verse 12, "His eyes were a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, having a name that had been written, which no one had perceived except himself." That's Joshua. "And having been dressed in a robe dipped in blood." The robe at this time is not dipped in blood because the war hasn't started. This is a vision John sees. I think his robe is the color of blood because the war has not started yet. "And his name is called the Word of Yahweh." And this is Joshua. And the armies, see the groom, Joshua is the groom, he's changing clothes. He's changing from his groom's clothes into his warrior's clothes. He's putting on his warrior's clothes. He's getting on the white horse. "And the armies in the heaven, dressed in fine linen, white and clean, they followed him, also on white horses." So the bride looks like is going with him, and whoever else is in the armies of the heaven. Verse 15, "Out of his mouth," this is Joshua, the coming king, the warrior, "out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations." Smite the nations. Who is gathering around Jerusalem? The 200 million man army. It's the nations. All the nations of the earth are gathering around Jerusalem. "And he shall shepherd them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of El Shaddai. And on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Master of Masters." If you have other translations, it may be a little different, but it's a very high title, a very high office that he's going to have. And he says, "I saw one messenger standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice and said to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven, 'Come and gather together for the supper of the great Elohim.'" Vultures are gathering. "And come to eat," in verse 18, come to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of commanders, the flesh of strong ones, the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, small and great." The military may have some non-military people traveling with them. They'll have to have cooks and firewood people, and maybe some civilians with them. And they're all traveling there together. Now, it looks like it's already setting up badly. It's setting up badly for the 200 million man army. He's calling the birds. It's setting up badly. Verse 19, "And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to fight him who sat on the horse and his army." So him on the horse with his army, that's Joshua. They're going to see him coming in the clouds. Now, And it's all the nations of the earth has sent some of their army over there, 200 million. And it might be they fear space invaders. People are coming from outer space. You don't know what this is. We got to destroy the invaders from outer space. But it's Joshua and his company. It's Joshua and his company. So verse 20, and the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he led astray those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his enemies. And these two were thrown alive into the lake of fire, burning with sulfur. And verse 21, and the rest were killed with the sword which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. That's Joshua. He might give verbal commands that they all die because they're his enemies. And all the birds were filled with their flesh. So it looks bad for the 200 million man army. I would say that all the birds were filled with their flesh. They lost. The 200 million man army, they had, oh, we're going to win. We got him outnumbered. They lost. That's what it means. They lost. So let's turn to Zechariah 14 again. Let's get a little bit of something about this battle near the beginning of the millennium. Let's look in Zechariah. And it's Zechariah 14, and we'll start in verse 1. Zechariah 14 and verse 1. And Zechariah 14, it's before Malachi. It's after Zephaniah, maybe. It's after Haggai. Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14. This is the battle around Jerusalem at the beginning of the millennium. And it says, Zechariah 14 and verse 1, see, a day will come for Yahweh, and your spoil shall be divided in your midst. And I shall gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. That's the 200 million man army again. I'll gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. And the city will be taken, the houses plundered, the women ravished. Half the city will go into exile. The remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. And Joshua shall go forth, and he shall fight against these nations as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day, and at that time, if you see that in the Bible, in that day and at that time, it means end time events. This is right before the millennium starts. Verse 4, and in that day his feet will stand upon the Mount of Olives, and also the feet of the bride and the feet of his company with him. They'll stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, a very great valley. And half of the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it toward the south. Now that's moving a lot of dirt. So there's a lot of old buildings and rubble and destroyed buildings and maybe a lot of dead soldiers. When they move all that dirt to split the Mount of Olives, they're going to bury a lot of people maybe. Maybe it's going to be that way. Well, we'll see if we can determine. So let's look now at Zechariah 14 and verse 16. Let's read that again. We've heard that today. Let's read it again. Zechariah 14 and 16. And it shall be all that are left from all the nations that came up against Jerusalem. Who is that? 200 million man army again. And they'll go up from year to year. All the nations will go up from year to year to bow themselves to the king. Joshua will be there as king of the earth in Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. See, we're here today on Feast of Tabernacles. Now, I don't think all the people of the world, every person cannot go to Jerusalem. There'd be too many people. But I think at least they will have to send what? A diplomatic corps. They got to send diplomats over there to take gifts to the king, Joshua, take gifts to the worship there in Jerusalem. And they have to go up to Jerusalem every year to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And if any one of the clans of the earth don't come up to Jerusalem, any nation on earth that don't send a delegation to bow himself to King Joshua of hosts, and on them there will be no rain. So now, see, we have just, in man's experiment of self-rule, he says, all right, try it and see how that works for you. But now he's going to begin to enforce rules. So he says, you come up to the Feast of Tabernacles every year, or you're getting no rain, guys. And you can't just say, well, next week we give in. No, it's a year. It's a year. No rain for a year until the next Feast of Tabernacles. Now, he may allow repentance halfway through if they get dry, but But they're going to have a hard time if they don't come up. And verse 18, Zechariah 14 and verse 18, and if the clan of Egypt does not come up and enter in, then there's no rain on them. And this is the plague with which Joshua plagues the nations who don't come up to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. See, you're not going to get rain, guys. This is the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations of the earth. If they don't come up to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, they get no rain, see. So he's putting teeth in it now. The law of Yahweh, he's putting teeth in it. So they're getting ready, and he wins the battle with the 200 million man army, and he calls all the birds in the Middle East, in ancient history, all the big shots, the kings and the princes, all the great warriors. They really wanted to have an honorable burial. They wanted to have a lot of people mourning with horses and wagons and swords and shields and just have a great ceremony for their funeral. So he gives them the added dishonor. If they're going to fight against him, the vultures are going to be your funeral. It's a dishonorable burial. It's more dishonor. The possums, the raccoons, the vultures, that's going to be your undertaker. So he's given them that disgrace also. Now, so he's won that battle. Now let's look at something else that's interesting. Let's turn to Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20. And Satan the devil's been causing a lot of trouble. We read earlier where he and his team of demons have actually encouraged all these nations of the earth to come up to Jerusalem to the battle where they all got killed. In Revelation 20 and verse 1, this is still in John's vision, Revelation 20 and verse 1, and I saw a messenger, an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the pit of the deep and a great chain in his hand. What kind of chain would an angel carry? I don't know, but he's got one. And verse 2, and the angel with the chain, he seized the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and he bound him for 1,000 years. Now, can we have any doubt who this is? It says it's the dragon, and it's the serpent of old, and it's the devil, and it's Satan. There's 4 references to the same being. He's kind of inspired this death and destruction, trying to defeat Joshua. So he's going to be bound up for 1,000 years. Sometimes we read this and we go over this on Day of Atonement. See, people have to take punishment where punishment is due. So Satan's going to be bound up for 1,000 years, and that 1,000 years is the millennium. So right after this war where the 200 million man army was destroyed, sometime right soon after that, the angel comes. I don't know what kind of chain he's got that he can bind Satan, but it says here he's got one. So he's going to get it taken care of. So he's going to be bound up for 1,000 years where he can't deceive people anymore. So let's go on a little. Now let's look at something else a little. That was the big battle that was at the beginning of the millennium, and Joshua won. So now let's look at the end of the millennium, the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles today. So we're kind of representing the 7 days of Feast of Tabernacles. That's like the period of the last millennium, the last 1,000 years that Messiah will rule. So we're toward the end of the Feast of Tabernacles. Let's kind of look toward the end of the millennium. It kind of fits a little bit. Let's go back to Revelation 20 again. Go back to Revelation 20, and we'll read that again. He says, I saw a messenger at the beginning of the millennium. I saw a messenger come down from heaven, having the key to the pit of the deep and a great chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. So the millennium is going to be good. Satan is bound up. Let's look at verse 3 now. They threw him into the pit of the deep. They shut him up. They set a seal on him. It says they set a seal on him that he should lead the nations no more astray. That's great. The millennium will be great without Satan. And then it says they set a seal on him so that he should lead the nations no more astray until the 1,000 years were ended. Right after the millennium, and after that he has to be released for a little while. Oh, why are they going to do that? We've had such a good millennium, such a peaceful, prosperous millennium. Why are they going to turn that rascal loose again? So, I don't know why they're going to do that, but we had a Bible study about this very question. Why is he going to release him again at the end of the millennium? And it was a Bible study about this many people. So the fellow giving the Bible study asked, well, why did he release Satan again? And the adults are all quiet. They're not going to say a word because they think, well, this minister, it's a trick question. He's going to embarrass us, see. So they're not going to say anything. So the room is deathly quiet. The room is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. So in that silence, why does he release Satan at the end of the millennium? A little 8-year-old girl pipes up, and you could hear her all over the room. She says, to see if the people have learned anything from the mouth of a babe. So that might be why it is at the end of the millennium. So, all right, world, you've had all this prosperity and peace. Let's see if you've learned anything. Maybe that's what it is. So let's look now in Revelation 20 and verse 7. This is going to be at the end of the millennium. Revelation 20 and verse 7. And it says, and when the 1,000 years have ended, see, that's the end of the millennium, Satan shall be released from his prison. He shall go out to lead the nations astray again, which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog. The nations that are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog. So Gog and Magog, we looked at that. I've tried to find out who that is. You can get a lot of different information if you look in commentaries and whatever about Gog and Magog. We tried to find some more last night, and I was trying to find somebody that would give us a definite answer. What's the modern day name of Gog and Magog? And these guys say, well, maybe it's this. Somebody else says it's this. So we can't get a real good definition for it, but we'll see about who they are and where they are. So Satan goes out to lead the nations astray, which are in the four corners of the earth. In the four corners of the earth. So Gog and Magog is pretty big. Whoever they are is pretty big to be in the four corners of the earth. And to gather them together for battle, whose number is as the sand of the sea. I think everybody's translations will say that. Gog and Magog is as the sand of the sea. Maybe another 200 million army. Maybe it's more than 200 million this time. But it's another huge army. Huge army. Right after the millennium, Satan stirs them up again. In verse 9, Revelation 20 and verse 9, they came up over the breadth of the earth. They surrounded the camp of the set-apart ones in the beloved city. That's land of Israel, the promised land. Jerusalem would be the beloved city. And fire came down from Elohim out of heaven and burned them up, consumed them. So it just looks to me like they lost too. They lost. Gog and Magog lost. And we can read, let's see if we can read a little more there. Verse 10, and the devil who led them astray was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet are, and they shall be tortured day and night forever and ever. And there's no record, after Satan is thrown in the fire with these other guys, there's no record that he ever gets out again for all eternity. It looks like he don't get out again. And now let's see if we can find out a little more about Gog and Magog. Let's turn to Ezekiel 38. Let's find out a little more about Gog and Magog. Now, Father Yahweh and Yeshua, sometimes they give us prophecy. They hit the high points, but they don't fill in the details. So we don't really know any of the details, but we can maybe have a parable or have a speculation or something. So we'll have some parables and speculation. We'll read here and then see if we can fill in a little bit. But Ezekiel 38 and verse 1. Ezekiel 38 and verse 1. Ezekiel 38 and verse 1. And the word of Yahweh came to me saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog and the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, Tubal, and prophesy against him. Now right here, it don't say what it was, but right away, this is where it's first mentioned in Ezekiel. There's already discussed between Yahweh and Gog and Magog. So they're sinning somehow. He says right off the bat, set your face against Gog and his friends. In verse 3, and you say, Thus says Master Joshua, see, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh and Meshech and Tubal, and I shall turn you around, and I shall put hooks in your jaws, and I shall lead you out with all your army, horses and horsemen, clad perfectly, a great assembly with armor and shields, and all them handling swords. Now the term, I shall put a hook in your jaw. That's what we do with a fish. We put a hook in his jaw and we pull him out. It's just a Hebrew expression. This may not be literally a hook, but it means I'll make you go where it might not be good for you. I'll make you go where you don't want to go. So maybe Gog and his friends, well, we really don't want to go down to Jerusalem and fight because we've heard what happened to the last group that tried that, see. So maybe they don't want to go, but he says, all right, even if you don't want to go, I'll put a hook in your jaw. I'll make you go down there with your army. See, that's what he's saying. Now if it's, see, we have in the day when Revelation was written, they had horses, spears, shields, armor. Technology is greatly advanced, so when this day comes now, it might be, instead of horses and horsemen, it might be tanks and trucks and jets. The technology might change, but it's still their war machine. I'm going to put a hook in your jaw. I'm going to make you and your war machine come to Israel, whether you want to come or not. And then in verse 5, it says, Persia, Cush, and Put. Persia is Iran. Iran is anti-Israel right now. Persia, that's where Persia is, Iran. Cush and Put are in Ethiopia. All of them with shield and helmet, so they're coming from all sides. Here's another one that's hard to find. Verse 6, Gomer and all his bands. Some people say, well, it's Turkey. We get a little more idea as we go along. The house of Togarmah, from the far north and all its bands. Many people with you from the far north. So from Jerusalem, that could be maybe Turkey, maybe it's across the Black Sea, it's Ukraine, it's Russia, maybe it's Mongolia, maybe it's even China and India. They're coming from the east. You know, in the first war, they dried up the Euphrates. Well, this is the end of the millennium. So we know that Gog and Magog and their friends, they're in the far north. So just far north above Israel is Russia, Siberia, all the way up to there. And some commentaries will say it's in the nations that are the stands. The stands. It's Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and there's 2 or 3 right there that have got stan at the end of them. It might be from that area. They're all Muslim. They're north of Iran. Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, the stands. Kazakhstan, it's right in that area. Maybe that's it. He don't tell us. He just says, from the far north, all these people are coming, and they are as the sand of the sea. So it's a lot of them. So he tells looks like the Israelites there, be ready, prepare yourself, you and all your assemblies that are assembled, and you shall be a guard for them. Watch. So verse 8, after many days you shall be called up. All right, that's to Gog and Magog. After many days, that's the end time after the millennium. And the next verse, the next sentence gives away, in the latter years you will come into the land of Israel. In the latter years, at that day, at that time. That's all end time. Prophecy. In the latter years, at the end of the millennium. You'll come into the land of those brought back from the sword and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel. That's the second gathering. We studied about that earlier. So all the Israelites have been gathered back to the land. They've lived in peace and prosperity for 1,000 years. And now he says, that's where I'm going to bring you back down here. And let's see in a minute here if we can find what is the hook that he puts in their jaw to bring them down. It won't really be a hook. What is the bait? What is the attraction that Yahweh and Yahshua give them to make them come to Israel? He's going to tell us what the hook is here in a minute. All right, the people on the mountains of Israel, the mountains had been a continual waste, but they brought them back. The land is green and prosperous, a land of milk and honey. But they were brought out of the peoples, and out of all of them, they came and dwell safety. And you shall go up, coming like a storm. This is to Gog and Magog again, whoever they are. They're, pretty big nations to the north of Israel. They have armies that are like the sands of the sea. All right. You will go up. You're coming like a storm. You're covering the land like a cloud. You and all your bands and many people with you. Verse 10, thus says Master Joshua. And it shall be in that day that words arise in your heart, and you shall devise an evil plan. Here comes the hook. See, now, apparently, They've lived there until this part. They've lived there, maybe relatively content. They've not caused any trouble. But at the end of the millennium, when Satan's loosed, he stirs them up immediately. They've got some kind of grievance. He stirs them up immediately. And he says, words arise in your heart. You shall devise an evil plan. This is the hook. And you shall say, let me go up against a land of unwalled villages. That's Israel in the millennium. They don't need an army. They don't need walls. They're safe. So Gog has noticed that. Let me go up against a land of unwalled villages. Let me go to those at rest. Those at rest who dwell safely. All of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. It looks like an easy invasion. They don't have walls. They don't have bars and gates. Come on, guys. This is going to be easy. Let's rob them. This is going to be the hook. Now, verse 12, see, this is the hook. This is the hook. Now, Father Yahweh and Master Yahshua, they can plant in their minds attitudes. Attitudes of fear, attitudes of greed, attitudes of coveting. So, verse 12, he puts in their minds now to take plunder, to take booty, to stretch out your hand against the waste place that are now again inhabited. That's the promised land. And against a people gathered from the peoples, acquiring livestock and goods to dwell in the middle of the land. Who dwell in the middle of the land? And then it mentions in verse 13, two other nations say to Gog, this is Sheba and Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, all of them young lions shall say to you, and all of these, Sheba, Dedan, Tarshish, they might be with them. It says they're all young lions. They're all pretty strong nations and armies of themselves. But they ask Gog and Magog, have you come to take plunder? Yes. Have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to bear away silver and gold, and to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? That's the hook. It's greed. Let's go down there, guys. It's easy. It'll be an easy robbery. We'll get a lot of stuff. So their greed is the hook that brings them down there. All right, verse 14, therefore, son of man, prophesy, you shall say to Gog, thus says the Master Yahshua, in that day when my people Israel dwell safety, would you not know? Do you not know they're down there dwelling safely? Well, yes, we know. We're going down there to steal their stuff. They're not playing, they don't have a Department of Defense. And verse 15, you shall come from your place out of the far north. Gog is in the far north. Gog, Magog, and all their buddies, all their associates, they're in the far north. And you and many peoples with you, and all of them riding on horses, a great assembly, a mighty army. And you shall come up against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land. In the latter days it shall be. See, some historians will say, well, this has already taken place. This has already happened in history. And it was the Ottoman Empire that took over. No. This is in the latter days it's going to be. It's right at the end of the millennium, right after the millennium, after the first 1,000 years. And verse 16, we'll finish that. In the latter days it shall be, and I shall bring you against my land. This is Yahweh, Yahshua talking. See, they put the hook in her jaw. I will bring you against my land in order that the nations know me. See, your great army, and outside Israel and Jerusalem, this might be, at that time, the greatest army on the earth. Who can beat them? They're great. They're big. So he says, all right, I'm going to bring you down here against my nation in order that the nations, all the nations of earth, know me. Oh, these poor guys, they went down there, they fought Yahshua, they lost, see. He wants everybody to know that. When I am set apart in you, O Gog, before their eyes. So he says, Gog, I'm going to bring you down here to defeat you so the rest of the nations will see you lose. You can't fight him. We're going to do that for you. All right, let's go to verse 21. Ezekiel 38 and verse 21. Ezekiel 38 and verse 21. Now, we know that Father Yahweh and Yahshua, they can put ideas in your head. They can put attitudes in your head. They can put fear in your head. They can put joy in your head. They can give you all these emotions just to a few people or to a whole nation. They can give you a spirit of fear. They can give you a spirit of peace. So let's notice how he defeats this army now. He's done this before. He's done this before. So verse 21, Ezekiel 38:21, I shall call for a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the Master Yahshua, and the sword of each one being against his brother. So all of Gog's army, Yahshua and Yahweh, they give them a spirit of confusion, they give them a spirit of fear, they give them a spirit of misdirection, and they start killing each other. That's what I think that means. It's going to be a sword of each one being against his brother. When Gideon was going to be the judge, they did that against the Midianites. The Midianites had a great army. He caused confusion in the camp, and the Midianites all killed each other. Well, he's going to do that again with Gog. And let's look now in verse 22. We'll go to verse 22. After they just have confusion, they kill each other. As the sand of the sea, they have confusion, they kill each other. And I shall judge him with pestilence and blood, besides killing each other. Yahweh, Yahshua says, I'm going to give them disease and blood and rain down flooding rain and hailstones and fire and sulfur on him and on his bands and on the many peoples who are with him. So they're having big storms, big hailstones falling and killing people and ruining their army. And the whole time they're killing each other. In verse 23, and all that, this is the purpose of bringing Gog down there. Verse 23, I shall exalt myself and set myself apart, and I shall be known in the eyes of many nations. I want all the nations of the earth to see this. Don't know if we'll have television then, but all the nations of the earth will see this, and they shall know that I am Yahweh. They shall know that I am Yahshua, the King of the earth. When they see this big army defeated, see. So this is the big battle that's right at the end of the millennium. And let's look in verse 39, or chapter 39, Ezekiel 39, and verse 1. Ezekiel 39 and verse 1. And you, son of man, prophesy against Gog, and you shall say, thus says the Master Yahshua, see, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh and Meshach and Tubal. See, he's against them. You came down here against my people. I made you come down here. Now, it says in verse 2, I will turn you around and lead you on and bring you up from the uttermost parts of the north. See, even if you don't want to come down here, I'll make you come down here with your army so you can get killed and bring you against the mountains of Israel. And I shall strike the bow out of your left hand and make the arrows fall from your right hand. So whatever their weapons are, maybe they have rockets, machine guns, howitzers, they're not going to work. Your weapons will be dysfunctional. In verse 4, on the mountains of Israel you shall fall, you and all your bands and the peoples who are with you, to the birds of prey of every sort and to the beasts of the field I shall give you as food. So here are all these great commanders and rich men and governors and captains, and they're all going to die a dishonorable death and burial. The birds is going to pick their bones. That's their big state funeral. Be by the buzzards. In verse 5, on the face of the field you will fall, for I have spoken, declares Master Yahshua. Now let's go to verse 7. Let's go to verse 7. And that's all for a purpose. Maybe, see, in our day, we're thinking, you and I wouldn't think this, but in our day, a lot of the people in our country think, the United States, we have the greatest military on earth, we can't be beat. So maybe previously, they thought that of Gog and Magog. Oh, they can't be beat. And then they go down there and they see the buzzards working on them. Hey, they got beat. Sounds to me like they lost. Let's look at verse 7. And I'll make my set-apart name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I'll not let my set-apart name be profaned anymore, and the nations shall know that I am Yahweh, the set-apart one of Israel. See, he does that to his enemies. Gog may have been like Pharaoh in Egypt. When Moses and Aaron went down to Pharaoh in Egypt and says, Yahweh says, let my people go. So Pharaoh, oh, poor guy. Pharaoh, he says, who is this Yahweh that I should pay any attention to him? I don't know this Yahweh, and I'm not letting the people go. See, Gog and Magog may have said that. All the nations will know that I am Yahweh, the set-apart one of Israel, and my name will not be profaned anymore. See, they're going to see this. They're going to be impressed. I guess if they have anything critical to say, they're going to learn to keep their mouth shut, see. So let's look at verse 9, Ezekiel 39 and verse 9. Ezekiel 39 and verse 9. And those who inhabit the cities of Israel shall go out and set on fire and burn the weapons. So it might be wood, it might be some rubber or plastic that'll burn in the end time. But the people in the city goes out, they set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields, the armor, the bows, the arrows, the clubs, the spears, and they'll make fires with them for 7 years. So some of their military equipment, they're going to chop it up, split it up, saw it up, make firewood out of it. Huge pile, and that for 7 years. 7 years of firewood off this army of Gog and Magog that came down there. That's after they're all dead. And verse 10, they'll take no wood from the field nor cut down any from the forest, for with the weapons they make fire. See, don't know what that is. They shall make plunder, and they shall plunder those who plundered them, and they shall loot those who looted them, declares Master Yahshua. See? So, big, unbeatable army gets beat, and they become firewood for the other people. Verse 11, and it shall be on that day that I give Gog a place for a burial site there in Israel. In that day, that's right, this is right after the millennium, I'm going to give Gog and Magog and all their associates that went with them, I'm going to give them a burial site in Israel, the valley of those passing by east of the sea, so over near the Mediterranean, there's a highway, a road, a valley over near the Mediterranean, the valley of those passing by east of the sea, and stopping and passing by, because there they shall bury Gog and all his crowd, and they shall call it the valley of Hamongog. So over by the highway, there's a lot of the army. Megiddo is over that way. Armageddon, the plain, is over that way. It goes by various names. So it looks like as people are traveling up and down the coast highway, they're going to stop them and say, you guys come here and do burial duty for a few days. Maybe something like that. And it says in verse 12, the house of Israel shall bury them for 7 new moons in order to cleanse the land. Now the birds have already done their job, and they leave the bones. So the people of Israel are going to be burying bones for 7 months, 7 new moons. Huge army. Gone. Can't fight anymore. Verse 13, and all the people of the land shall bury them, and it shall be for a name to them on the day that I am esteemed, declares the Master Yahshua. So as the people are burying these bones, Israelites and Gentiles, they say, well, we kind of feared that army, but they're all destroyed. They're all destroyed. Then they shall separate men who continually pass through the land. They're going to have burial details. Israelites travel back and forth through the land, burying those who were passing through, those left on the surface of the ground in order to cleanse it. And at the end of 7 new moons, they shall search. And those passing through shall pass through the land. And when anyone sees a man's bone, he shall set up a sign beside it till the buriers have buried it in the valley of Hamongog. So if you're traveling across the plains or the grassland or whatever, it's kind of in the Old Testament law, it makes the land unclean if you leave human bodies on the surface. So even though they're the enemies, he wants all the bones picked up and he wants them buried. And he says it's to cleanse the land. This is at the end of the millennium. Verse 16, and also a city named Hamanah shall be there, so they shall cleanse the land. So a special city, dormitories and dining rooms made out there for maybe a military camp of people that are on burial detail. So that they cleanse the land. And you, son of man, thus says Master Yahshua, speak to every sort of bird and every sort of beast in the field. Assemble yourselves and come, gather from all around to my slaughtering, which I'm slaughtering for you, a great slaughtering on the mountains of Israel. And you shall eat flesh and drink blood. You shall eat the flesh of the mighty and drink the blood of princes of the earth, and of rams and lambs and goats and bulls, and all of them fatlings of Bashan. So I guess the army of Gog and Magog, they brought herds of animals for food with them. Well, they all died too. In verse 19, and you shall eat fat till you're filled, and drink blood till you're drunk at my slaughtering, which I'm slaughtering to you. And verse 20, you will be, this is to the birds now, and to the animals. You'll be satisfied at my table with horses and riders, with mighty men, and with all the men of battle, declares the Master Yahshua. And I shall set my esteem among the nations. All the nations of the earth are going to say, we didn't esteem Yahshua yesterday, we esteem him today. See, when they see all that, we didn't esteem him yesterday, we're going to esteem him today. And they shall set my esteem among the nations. All nations shall see my judgments, which I have executed, and my hand, which I have laid on them. And the house of Israel shall know that I am Yahweh, their Elohim, from that day onward. And all the nations shall know that Yahshua is king in Jerusalem, and the Father Yahweh has a law that he wants them all to use. So that's the story of the end time battle at the end of the millennium. The battle at the beginning of the millennium, Yahshua wins. The battle at the end of the millennium, Yahshua wins. And they all get a dishonorable burial. I think it mentions mighty men, kings, princes, all those. Oh, we're the great ones. We're the wise ones. We're going to go down there. We're rich. We're going to be even richer after we rob these people. Well, see, man's great plans don't always work out, see. Man's great plans don't always work out. So, some questions have been asked over the years. Why Gog? We know that in the land of Israel, they have prosperity, they have peace, they have blessings, the land of milk and honey. And the Gentiles that come up every year, they're getting rain, so they're having some prosperity too. But so why Gog? Why Gog? It seems like Gog was relatively content until Satan was let loose. So Satan's going to begin putting ideas in his head. But maybe, this is maybe now, you see, we can reason a little bit like this. I'm not adding to Torah, but we can think about it. We know the problems that humans have with the law, and we know the problems that nations have with the law. If they don't want to keep Torah, they're going to be in trouble. So maybe, this is maybe, that every year Gog and Magog and their groups, they were coming up to Jerusalem every year for the feast so they could get rain, but there was a little resentment. You know, this is not fair. We have religious freedom. We want to do it our own way. They have resentment. This is not fair for Israel to have all this wealth and prestige. So they're grumbling. They've been coming up to the feast for years and they're grumbling. And another idea that might be true, those areas today, a lot of them are Islam. So maybe even though there's prosperity in the Promised Land, the Israelites are there, Yahshua is on the throne in Jerusalem, and there's prosperity around, maybe they're still holding to Islam a little bit. Maybe. And another idea, this is the one that I think is a general cause. They're resisting the Holy Spirit of Yahweh. Gog and Magog and all their people are resisting the Holy Spirit of Yahweh, because another scripture says in the millennium, Yahweh says, I will pour out my Holy Spirit on the earth like the waters cover the sea. So Gog and Magog and their buddies, they've had a chance to have the Holy Spirit, and they've resisted it. So they're showing Yahshua, we're not going to cooperate with you. Now, another ministry says this, I like this idea. It says right now, Yahshua is deciding who he wants to spend eternity with. He's deciding among all the people and nations who he wants to spend eternity with. And for something, maybe resisting the Holy Spirit, he's saying, all right, Gog, Magog, and all your buddies, I've given you 1,000 years of the Holy Spirit. I've let you see an example of prosperity for 1,000 years, and you still won't cooperate. I don't want to live in eternity with you, Gog and Magog. You're not coming around, guys. I can't use you. That's a problem that individuals might have and nations might have too. So that's near the end of the millennium here. We're studying that on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Tomorrow's the great 8th day. So from our Bibles, we've seen about 2 great wars in the land of Israel and around Jerusalem. 2 huge wars. These events will happen. Yahshua, king of the earth, he wins both wars. Makes his name great. One great war at the beginning of the millennium, another great war at the end of the millennium. And it's going to teach all nations will learn to fear and respect the great names of Yahweh and Yahshua. These people down there in Israel, if they've got the name Yahweh, Yahshua, don't mess with them. Don't mess with them. And besides the Gentiles learning to respect the names of Yahweh and Yahshua. All Israel, if there's still any doubters, they'll learn. They'll see this and they'll learn to fear and respect the great names of Yahweh and Yahshua because of all these battles. Yahshua will be the king of the earth forever. You see, once this battle is over, it's cleaned up, there's prosperity and peace again. Yahshua is king over all the earth forever. It's the millennium, and then several scriptures say after the millennium, it goes on forever without cease. So this is a happy thought to me, because that means never again will Yahshua and Yahweh, never again will they allow humans to run the experiment of human self-rule without Torah. They're never going to run that experiment again. It's all right, we've shown you, it just don't work, you just can't do it. So when all this is over in the millennium, the first battle, the second battle, when all that's over, we're going to have an eternity of peace and calm and prosperity and wonderfulness and spirit of happiness and joy. And all of Israel can say, and all of the nations around can say, great be the names of Yahweh, and great be Yahshua.